We have a breaking news alert for you. It's finally here. The Supreme Court has made a decision on President Trump's tariffs. This is a huge case, a big ruling. It comes right before the State of the Union. And Shannon Bream, of course, is standing by with us. Shannon, do we have an initial thought on what the ruling is?
We do. We've got a very fractured opinion, but initially what it says, we know it's authored, the primary opinion, by the Chief Justice, and says essentially that this IEPA, this law that grants the president emergency powers, did not, it looks like by this first blush reading by Justice, the Chief Justice here, does not give him the power to levy these tariffs that he's levied. Part of this initial opinion says, the words regulate and importation, the president says that gives him the independent power to impose tariffs on imports from any country, any product, any rate, any time. These words, it says, cannot bear such weight. We know we've got a dissent by Justice Kavanaugh, by Thomas and Alito, it looks like, and those were the three we thought during the arguments, if anyone would be persuaded to allow the president to move forward with these tariffs, they would be the ones to do it. So at first blush, like I said, there are multiple parts and concurrences to this opinion, but it looks like what the primary holding is going to be is that these tariffs cannot be used in the way that the president had tried to use them. Let me get you to the closing paragraph that we have in this initial opinion here. It says, the president asserts the extraordinary power to unilaterally impose tariffs of unlimited amount, duration, and scope. In light of the breadth, history, and constitutional context of that asserted authority, he must identify clear congressional authorization to exercise it, meaning if he wants to do it, he's got to show that Congress has allowed him to do it. But they say IEPA, this emergency powers law, contains no reference to tariffs or duties. The government points to no statute in which Congress used the word regulate to authorize taxation. And until now, no president has ever read IEPA to confer such powers. We claim no special competence in matters of economics or foreign affairs, but we claim only, as we must, the limited role assigned to us by Article 3 of the Constitution. Fulfilling that role, we hold that IEPA does not authorize the president to impose tariffs. We'll keep reading. That is the first blush, authored by the Chief Justice John Roberts.
Shannon Bream, thank you so much. Bill Malutian is with me, and we will anchor through this hour. This is big breaking news, everyone. Yep. And Jonathan Turley is a constitutional law attorney and George Washington law professor. He's a Fox News contributor. We have been waiting for this decision. It is finally here. I don't think the White House will be surprised, even though they will be disappointed. They will probably vehemently disagree. But this is at least definitive, it sounds like, Jonathan, from the Supreme Court, that this was not allowed.
It is indeed, and this is what some of us predicted. This was a case where the administration was at a disadvantage. IEPA does not refer to tariffs, and tariffs are a big deal under the Constitution. It's a critical form of revenue that is left to Congress. And I thought that the administration did a terrific job in front of the Supreme Court. They could not have argued this case better, in my view. But you can't really escape that language. And right out of the bat, when that oral argument began, the Chief Justice John Roberts said, this is a tax. And you could almost hear the administration gulping, because that's not what they wanted the justices to take from their argument. But Roberts and others clearly view this as a tax that rests with Congress. Now, there's a lot of runway still for the administration. We have to really get into this opinion, into some of the weeds, to see if it is prospective only, but also the administration has other tools in its toolbox. It can actually impose tariffs under other statutes. So this night is hardly over for the administration when it comes to tariffs.
And Jonathan, the Supreme Court took months to make this decision. They had oral arguments back in November. They seemed pretty skeptical about this 1977 law that the president was using to impose these tariffs broadly. President Trump has said if the Supreme Court does this and strikes down his ability to use these tariffs, it would be disastrous for the country. Talking about how are you supposed to send the money back? How do you put the toothpaste back into the bottle? What are your thoughts on that? Is the United States going to suddenly have to return the money it took in via the tariffs as part of this 1977 law that the court is saying he can't use to do this?
That's what we're going to have to dig a little deeper into the opinion to see if it is prospective only. Also, Congress has to decide if it wants to move here. The economy is doing extremely well with this administration and with the tariffs. And so the question is Congress going to move in here to make sure that we don't have to step back in terms of the progress that has been made. In any case, we're looking at years of intensive and expensive litigation unless Congress wants to intervene and try to streamline that process. But there's still a lot to be resolved. This is a fractured decision. It's what some of us predicted. You know, when I noted after the oral argument was that it seemed to me like a majority of justices were not buying the tariff argument generally under IEPA, the statute. But they were all expressing different reasons, or many of them were expressing different reasons for their objections. So it's fractured in that sense. So we have to see how this is going to play out. But the pressure will be now not just on the administration, but on Congress, because I think that the public itself would not want to see a wholesale return of tariff money to the detriment of the economy.
Shannon Bream, you've been reading. What more do you know?
Well, so to this issue of refunds, it did come up, as Professor Turley said there during the oral arguments, this fact that there would be some unwinding in how you would do it. So whether or not the court told us in this opinion, here's what I found. We've got a dissent here from Justice Kavanaugh, and he says this, that there are other tariffs. The president's authority is not shut down with any other option, but with respect to this particular law, it is shut down. But then he goes on to say, one issue is going to be refunds. Refunds of billions of dollars would have significant consequences for the U.S. Treasury. This is in his dissent. The court says nothing today about whether, and if so, how, the government should go about returning the billions of dollars that it has collected from importers. He says that process is likely to be, quote, a mess, as was acknowledged at oral argument. So he says here, as we continue to read through, multiple pages and multiple opinions here, that nowhere does the court in this opinion address how that's going to be undone. Justice Alito also asked about this during the oral arguments, and there was real concern about how in the world you do this. Justice Kavanaugh also talks about in his dissent, a lot of those costs have already been passed on to consumers and collected from them. So unbringing this bell, the court doesn't seem to provide any guidance within this opinion about how that's supposed to be done, other than saying, under IEPA, the president couldn't have collected these various waves of tariffs that he did. He's got, as the professor said, many other ways he can collect tariffs. I've talked to Secretary Bessent and others about their backup plans and what they would do. They know they have to plan for that, so there are other tariffs they can do. But this sweeping big bite at the apple is not going to be allowed in a 6-3 opinion here by the justices.
Can I ask you one thing, Shannon? One of the things that Jonathan Turley said is that the economy is doing fairly well. And he said because of the tariffs, I might say in spite of the tariffs, there have been a lot of different things. For example, some of the tariffs that were suggested at the beginning on Liberation Day never came to pass, or they were pared well back, for example, on coffee or groceries, kitchen cabinets, things like that. So the president is wanting to use this as maximum flexibility. You interview a lot of people that are representing their constituents on Capitol Hill. One of the things that Congress has done in the last 25 years or so is just basically fritter away its responsibilities, letting the executive branch do a lot. And at this point, do you know, is there anyone there that has the ability to go to the White House and say, here's what we can do. Let's try to pass a law that will give the flexibility, give the law, make sure that it is within the Constitution. Because the president has a chance to get this done before the midterms, but it would take a full court press and a lot of bipartisan support.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It would be a very heavy lift on Capitol Hill. But here's the thing. This law doesn't use the word tariffs. There are obviously skeptics among 6 of these justices on the Supreme Court who thought Congress ever intended for the president to have this particular power. So sure, there could be a legislative fix that you could go through to do this. But when you talk about Congress ceding its power, that's one of those things, too, that came up with Justice Gorsuch during the arguments. He said, how far can Congress go in ceding over power if that's the government, the Trump administration's argument that Congress does want him to have the power on these tariffs? Could it say, okay, we're no longer going to, maintain the power to declare war? How much could Congress give away? So he was clearly skeptical. He's got a concurrence. I haven't read fully yet, but he seems to have signed on to this idea that the president doesn't have power under IEPA to levy these particular tariffs. But yeah, a legislative fix would be the clearest thing, and I think in an election year, probably the least likely solution at this point.
Shannon, sorry, just real quickly, who were the 3 that voted against?
We have dissents from Justices Kavanaugh, Thomas, and Alito. And again, like I said, at oral arguments, they seemed the most open to possibly leaving the door open for the president to have this power. So they find themselves in the minority and the losing end today.
Let's go ahead and bring in former Deputy Assistant Attorney General John Yoo. John, you're watching this breaking news with us. Huge ruling this morning, going to have worldwide impacts. And the president has said a ruling like this is really going to hurt the economy. And you've heard Shannon talking about it. How are we going to figure out how to return this money that has been brought in, hundreds of billions of dollars? Give us your initial reaction to this ruling from the Supreme Court today.
This is a major restriction on a president's ability to act during times of emergency. There were two questions. Is there an emergency at all posed by the trade deficits? And then did Congress give the president the power to impose tariffs under the IEEPA statute when it said, when Congress said the president can regulate, quote unquote, regulate economic relations with another country? Notice here in the opinion, the court does not touch the question whether in the national emergency. So that part of the president's power is still preserved. The part that's been narrowed, of course, as the others have said, is the word regulate does not include the power to impose a tariff. That doesn't mean the president can't do this in the future. There are other trade laws which explicitly delegate from Congress to the president the ability to impose tariffs. The thing that President Trump has to do, which he didn't do these tariffs, remember, he did these worldwide at once for all products.
Yep.
Essentially, court is saying you have to go back to the drawing board and you have to do it country by country. Individual countries have to be shown to be engaged in unfair trade practices or have to be shown to be a national security threat and has to be a report. And it will take President Trump roughly a year if he really wants to go forward with the tariffs. Now, I like Shannon's point a great deal. This might be a blessing in disguise because we just had GDP report numbers from last year that show the economy significantly slowed. If all the tariffs that President announced are immediately eliminated and he has to take about a year, if he really chooses to do it again, has to take about a year to impose these tariffs again, that might actually have a positive boost on the economy, which could have a very positive effect on President Trump and Republicans by the midterm elections.
While we await any word from the White House to respond, one of the things I remember, John, when this case was first filed, it was a toy manufacturer, and he said he was a very reluctant plaintiff, but that as a business owner, he had no choice. And yes, I understand it could be very messy as it moves forward, but on the principle of the law, it does seem to make sense. But what do you think about the possibility of Congress being able to pass a law that would do what President Trump wants? So he wants to decouple from China, worthy goal. Is there a way to do this in a bipartisan fashion that could say, okay, this is constitutional, but it also helps protect American manufacturing and is in line with the foreign policy goals of the United States?
Dana, I have a lot of sympathies for the small manufacturer, the small importer, the American consumer who was in a state of uncertainty about these tariffs and we're paying higher prices for goods. But on the other hand, and as Justice Kavanaugh says in his dissent, and the majority doesn't respond to this point, I think they agree, figuring out a refund process is going to be the mother of all refund tax seasons. I mean, this is going to be a disaster. But that's up for another day. That's up to the lower courts. In terms of the future, I would actually say, Dana, and I teach trade law and international business law for my sins at Berkeley when I don't get to teach the Constitution. When I teach those, I teach the students. Actually, President Trump could turn around tomorrow and start the process of reimposing tariffs. He doesn't need new legislation from Congress. There are a bunch of federal statutes. They go by fancy terms like Super 301 and Section 232. There are a bunch of existing trade laws. In fact, President Trump can use IEEPA itself. Again, the thing the court is saying is that you have to do it in a certain way. You have to use these trade laws to be specific as to a country and what that country is doing. Is that country a national security threat? So, for example, under the IEEPA law itself, the United States has pursued not tariffs, complete embargoes, 100% cutoffs of trade with countries like Iran, Cuba, and North Korea. If President Trump wanted to cut China off entirely, as some people, I think, in his administration would love, he can use the IEEPA statute to do that. And if he wants to impose more fine-tuned tariffs of 10%, 20%, he can use these other trade laws that I've been talking about that are sitting on the books. But you have to do a study, you have to do a report, it can be challenged in court. It takes roughly about a year to be able to use those. By the way, those were the laws that President Trump used in his first term, when, if you might remember, he launched a trade war with China. He imposed tariffs on other countries.
A highly anticipated decision has just happened in the U.S. Supreme Court. The court has struck down President Trump's tariffs, upending a key plank of his economic agenda in the process. The decision centers on tariffs imposed under an emergency powers law, which the president was using to implement sweeping tariffs on a global scale. I'm Harris Faulkner. You are in the Faulkner Focus. The ruling 6-3. It was issued last hour, with Chief Justice Roberts writing the majority opinion. Justices Thomas, Alito, and Kavanaugh dissented. Reaction coming in fast and furious. Now let's watch together.
It goes to the core of the balance between the branches. I think what the Supreme Court was so concerned about is that we have a very strong executive in this country. It's gotten to be more and more powerful. And the key ability of Congress to check and balance those powers is the power of the purse, is the control of revenue. And I think these justices were concerned that they were looking at a slippery slope here that would allow the president to really make inroads into that authority. So they have created a bright line with regard to IEPA. They've also created something of a bright line in terms of defending Congress's inherent authority.
On cue, Democrats are celebrating. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer calls the decision, quote, a victory for the wallets of every American consumer. Trump's illegal tariff tax just collapsed. He tried to govern by decree and stuck families with the bill. Enough chaos in the trade war. All of that a quote. Republicans criticizing the high court. Ohio Senator Bernie Moreno posted, SCOTUS's outrageous ruling handcuffs our fight against unfair trade that has devastated American workers for decades. These tariffs protected jobs, revived manufacturing, and forced cheaters like China to pay up. Now globalists win. This betrayal must be reversed. Again, a quote. The president was braced for the outcome, as you might imagine. Last month, he told his administration to find a workaround.
The Trump tariffs have delivered us trillions of dollars of new investment, unprecedented new partnerships on minerals, rare earths, defense, and artificial intelligence, and historic levels of foreign military sales. You know, you have the Supreme Court now going to rule on whether or not we can use tariffs. Can you believe this? A case brought about by people that are China-centric, foreign-centric, but China-centric. We'll figure something out if we don't win.
Shannon Bream, Fox News chief legal correspondent and anchor of Fox News Sunday, with more on this. Shannon.
Yeah, so Harris, I've talked with Secretary Bessent, Kevin Hassett, in the weeks waiting for this opinion. They clearly knew there was going to need to be potentially another plan, so they are ready for that. But here's what the court said today. There were a couple of things. There was a big argument during the arguments about whether or not these tariffs resulted in being taxes. They were collecting revenue, and clearly the 6-3 majority today felt that was a problem. They also note the statute doesn't ever specifically give the president this power to levy these tariffs. I want to read you a bit from the Chief Justice writing for the majority. Says the president asserts the extraordinary power to unilaterally impose tariffs of unlimited amount, duration, and scope. He must identify clearly congressional authorization to exercise it. IEPA's grant of authority to regulate importation falls short. It says there's no reference to tariffs or duties. The government points to no statute in which Congress used the word regulate to authorize taxation, which is how they viewed these tariffs. We hold IEPA does not authorize the president to impose tariffs. So now what? That's the big question. It came up with Justices Barrett and Alito during the arguments. What happens if we have to unwind this mess? Well, Justice Kavanaugh, in his dissent that was joined by Justices Thomas and Alito, says this: the court's decision is likely to generate serious practical consequences in the near term. One issue is the refunds. Refunds of billions of dollars would have significant consequences for the U.S. Treasury, but the court today says nothing about whether, and if so, how the government should go about returning the billions of dollars it's collected from importers. That process is likely to be a mess, as was acknowledged at oral argument. So we have the big answer, but Harris, now we've got more questions about what happens next.
All right, well, we're ready to get more answers. Shannon Bream, thank you for getting us started. Let's go to Carrie Urban, Fox News legal editor, Marcus Lemonis, who's on set with me now, executive chairman of Bed Bath & Beyond, entrepreneur and host of The Fixer on Fox. Great to see you both. Carrie, I'm going to start with you. 6-3, how did this break down? Some Republicans saying that they are shocked and angry.
Look, I personally found Justice Kavanaugh's dissent more compelling than that of the majority. And there's this focus on the mess, right? The mess that is likely to take place in terms of refunding and what that even looks like, how that'll even go. And I would argue the mess began, I would say, at the founding of the country, when Congress began to delegate their authority to the president to impose taxes. Not only did they delegate it for the last 250 years over and over again, there are a number of federal statutes that authorize the president to impose tariffs. And Kavanaugh made the point, which I thought was a really good one. He said, he was looking at that history, and he said, well, it looks like the majority thought that the president just checked the wrong statutory box in doing this under IEPA. He talks about the mess that's likely to ensue. He talks about the possible impact on trade deals that have already occurred with countries like Japan and the UK and China. But I would say the good news for the Trump administration, though this is a big loss, is that given the other federal laws that exist, he shouldn't be unnecessarily constrained in imposing these tariffs going forward. But I would say that this is a big deal, and that just because something hasn't been done before, a silence, in essence, doesn't mean that it's not lawful. And that majorities seem to take that approach that, well, this is not how it should be done, so it can't be done. And Kavanaugh says, well, no, wait a second. There's broad language here.
Right.
We look at the history, we look at court precedent, and he thought, as did Justice Thomas and Alito, that the president was within his authority to do what he did.
All right. Marcus, I'm going to come to you in 1 second. I want a quick follow-up with you, Carrie. So the Democrats who say that this is a packed court, the politics of that now, what does today's decision show us?
Oh, well, of course, they're always going to say that. But we had Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Gorsuch and Justice Amy Coney Barrett joining the majority. So it undercuts certainly that argument. But look, I think the president is going to be frustrated by this, given what he's been trying to do. And I would also argue that, he did declare national emergencies at the beginning of, I believe, 2025. And this statute, IEPA, allows the president to broadly regulate foreign commerce when there is a national emergency going on. And so the Supreme Court came in and basically they replaced their judgment for that of the president's in this particular instance.
All right, let's move to the money aspect, Marcus. We've just gotten in a statement. I was watching BBC and also Sky News this morning to try to get those trading partners in Europe, their perspective on it. I handed you from Downing Street the latest statement from that. So my team doesn't have this for screen yet, but we'll read it together. A Downing Street spokesperson has said the UK government welcomes legal clarity from the US Supreme Court ruling and sees it as providing certainty for both businesses and Great Britain and international traders after months of tariff uncertainty. I'll skip down to this part. They emphasize that the UK and the US remain close trading partners. They want to protect UK economic interests and reserve trade issues through negotiation and cooperation. So all of this just moments after that court ruling in the last hour was made public. What's your take on what the UK is saying now and what future days could look like, specific to them?
Yeah, I think it's important. This isn't about whether tariffs are good or bad. It's about whether he had the authority. And then the UK is saying he didn't have the authority. And we appreciate that now because our businesses have been severely impacted. Our economy has been severely impacted by this. And while we want to be your trading partner, we want things to be on the level and not have your president, our president, doing things that make things imbalanced in their mind.
All right, that's from somebody who likes us. What about Canada? Because I wouldn't call it a love-love relationship there.
Canada's got a different problem. Remember, 301, which is aimed at China, and 232, which unfortunately Canada is the biggest sort of loser in that situation, is not getting out. This isn't going to change things with Canada around aluminum and steel. I think that what I want viewers to understand is that the idea behind tariffs is to bring manufacturing back to the United States, to bring investments back to the United States. And we have seen early signs of that. I think what the court has told us is, while we agree principally that that's the purpose of it, we don't like the methodology that you've used.
And with regard to Canada, and when I say it's not a love-love, look, this isn't going to necessarily help them, as you said, because it's a sectoral type of tariff, and this U.S. Supreme Court decision only covers something other than that. So there's tariffs against countries, so on and so forth. You have to go through Congress to get that. Carrie, if you're still with us, I want to ask you again about the politics real quickly. So if he has to go through Congress, we do know from the president's own words that he was looking at other, or told his team to look at other opportunities and options should this decision come down against him today. What could that look like?
Well, I think the president and his lawyers understand that the power squarely rests with Congress, but two things are at play. Congress routinely delegates that authority, and two, IEPA does give the president broad discretion to do these kinds of things in national emergencies. And by the way, before IEPA, there was another law that was like IEPA, and President Nixon imposed very similar tariffs when he declared national emergencies for similar reasons, and those were upheld in court. That was just right. That was right before IEPA was passed. But look, I think that as far as the good news is concerned for President Trump and this administration, and I mentioned this earlier, there are a number of federal statutes that allow the president to impose tariffs, and he can go forward and do just that.
All right, real quickly, clawback. If some of these countries want money back, what does that look like?
Well, it's not even some of these countries. It's some of our own companies in our own country that are going to want some money back. And so you have importers and retailers here in this country that are going to be looking for money back. It's not going to be like a week. It's going to be years before any of that money is resolved. Where's that money going to come from? The Treasury says they have the money to handle this. I don't know. We have a deficit problem. Maybe we'll start talking about spending again.
So far, the markets like it. They're up just by double digits right now. There was an immediate triple-digit response.
They like the predictability.
Right.
That's what they like.
Carrie and Marcus, thank you for being with me.
Wow. Got a lot of people. That's a new record. We set a record every time. Well, thank you very much for being here. The Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs is deeply disappointing, and I'm ashamed of certain members of the court, absolutely ashamed, for not having the courage to do what's right for our country. I'd like to thank and congratulate Justices Thomas, Alito, and Kavanaugh for their strength and wisdom and love of our country, which is right now very proud of those justices. When you read the dissenting opinions, there's no way that anyone can argue against them. There's no way. Foreign countries that have been ripping us off for years are ecstatic. They're so happy. And they're dancing in the streets, but they won't be dancing for long, that I can assure you. The Democrats on the court are thrilled, but they will automatically vote no. They're an automatic no, just like in Congress. They're an automatic no. They're against anything that makes America strong, healthy, and great again. They also are a frankly, disgrace to our nation, those justices. They're an automatic no, no matter how good a case you have. It's a no. But you can't knock their loyalty. It's one thing you can do with some of our people. Others think they're being politically correct, which has happened before far too often with certain members of this court, and it's happened so often with this court. What a shame. Having to do with voting in particular, when in fact they're just being fools and lapdogs for the rhinos and the radical left Democrats, and not that this should have anything at all to do with it. They're very unpatriotic and disloyal to our Constitution. It's my opinion that the court has been swayed by foreign interests and a political movement that is far smaller than people would ever think. It's a small movement. I won by millions of votes. We won in a landslide. With all the cheating that went on, there was a lot of it, but we still won in a landslide. Too big to rig. But these people are obnoxious, ignorant, and loud. They're very loud. And I think certain justices are afraid of that. They don't want to do the right thing. They're afraid of it. This was an important case to me, more as a symbol of economic national security, and also, I would say, just for our country itself, so important, because we're doing so well as a country. We've never done so well. The good news is that there are methods, practices, statutes, and authorities, as recognized by the entire court in this terrible decision, and also as recognized by Congress, which they refer to, that are even stronger than the IEPA tariffs available to me as President of the United States. And in actuality, I was very modest in my ask of other countries and businesses because I wanted to do, and it's very important. I wanted to be very well behaved because I wanted to do anything. I didn't want to do anything that would affect the decision of the court, because I understand the court. I understand how they are very easily swayed. I want to be a good boy. I have very effectively utilized tariffs over the past year to make America great again. Our stock market has just recently broken 50,000 on the Dow, and simultaneously, and even more amazingly, broken 7,000 on the S&P, two numbers that everybody thought upon our landslide election victory could not be attained. Think of that. Nobody thought it was possible to do it within 4 years, and we did it in 1 year. They said, you'll never be able, you'll go back and you read the geniuses, read their statements, all of the Nobel Prize winners in economics. They said, no, you couldn't do it in 4 years. Well, we didn't do it in 4 years. We did it in 1 year. We broke every record in the book, and we're continuing to do so. Tariffs have likewise been used to end 5 of the 8 wars that I settled. I settled 8 wars, whether you like it or not, including India, Pakistan, big ones, nuclear, could have been nuclear. Prime Minister of Pakistan said yesterday at the great meeting that we had, the Peace Board, he said yesterday that President Trump could have saved 35 million lives by getting us to stop fighting. They were getting ready to do some bad things. But they've given us great national security, these tariffs have. And together with our strong borders, reduced fentanyl coming into our country by 30%. When I use them as a penalty against countries illegally sending this poison into our country to poison our youth. All of those tariffs remain. They all remain. I don't know if you know that or not. They all remain. We're still getting them, and we will after the decision. I guess there's nobody left to appeal to. But again, those 3 people, such respect. I've had a lot of respect for them anyway, but such great respect. But other alternatives will now be used to replace the ones that the court incorrectly rejected. We have alternatives, great alternatives. Could be more money. We'll take in more money, and we'll be a lot stronger for it. We're taking in hundreds of billions of dollars. We'll continue to do so. To show you how ridiculous the opinion is, however, the court said that I'm not allowed to charge even $1. I can't charge $1. Can't charge $1. I would have used 1 penny, but we don't make the pennies anymore. We save money. Can't charge $1 to any country under IEPA. Not $1. I assume to protect other countries. This must have been done to protect those other countries, certainly not the United States of America, which they should be interested in protecting. That's what they're supposed to be protecting. But I am allowed to cut off any and all trade or business with that same country. In other words, I can destroy the trade. I can destroy the country. I'm even allowed to impose a foreign country-destroying embargo. I can embargo. I can do anything I want, but I can't charge $1. Because that's not what it says. And that's not the way it even reads. I can do anything I want to do to them, but I can't charge any money. So I'm allowed to destroy the country, but I can't charge them a little fee. I could give them a little 2-cent fee, but I cannot charge under any circumstances. I cannot charge them anything. Think of that. How ridiculous is that? I'm allowed to embargo them. I'm allowed to tell them you can't do business in the United States anymore. We want you out of here. But if I want to charge them $10, I can't do that. It's incorrect. Their decision's incorrect. But it doesn't matter because we have very powerful alternatives that have been approved by this decision. You know, they've been approved by the decision for those that thought they had us. And they're saying that I have the absolute right to license, but not the right to charge a license fee. So think of that. I have the right to license, which is a very powerful word. In many ways, license is more powerful than tariffs. In fact, I was thinking about using it. But they came up with the idea that I can license, just like the people that were opposing me told them to do. but not the right to charge a license fee. Think of that. Who ever heard of such a thing? What license has ever been issued without the right to charge a fee? You get a license, you charge a fee. It's automatic, but not with this court. But now the court has given me the unquestioned right to ban all sorts of things from coming into our country, to destroy foreign countries, but a much more powerful right than many people ever thought we even had, but not the right to charge a fee. How crazy is that? Our country is the hottest country anywhere in the world right now. And it was a dead country 1.5 years ago under an incompetent president. But now I'm going to go in a different direction, probably the direction that I should have gone the first time, but I read the language. I'm very good at reading language, and it read our way 100%, but now I'll go the way I could have gone originally, which is even stronger than our original choice. As Justice Kavanaugh, whose stock has gone so up, you have to see, I'm so proud of him, wrote in his dissent, although I firmly disagree with the court's holding today, the decision might not substantially constrain a president's ability to order tariffs going forward. So, think of that. The decision might not substantially constrain. And it doesn't, he's right. In fact, I can charge much more than I was charging. So I'm going to just start. Although I firmly disagree with the court's holding today, the decision might not substantially constrain a president's ability to order tariffs going forward. That's because numerous other federal statutes, which is so true, authorize the president to impose tariffs and might justify most, if not all, of the tariffs issued in this case. Even more tariffs, actually. Those statutes include, think of that, those statutes include, for example, the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, Section 232. All of these things I know so well. The Trade Act of 1974, Sections 122, 201, 301, and the Tariff Act of 1930, Section 338, all clear. But it's a little bit longer process. I thought I'd make things simple, but they didn't let us do that. I would like to thank Justice Kavanaugh for frankly, his genius and his great ability. Very proud of that appointment. In actuality, while I am sure that they did not mean to do so, the Supreme Court's decision today made a president's ability to both regulate trade and impose tariffs more powerful and more crystal clear rather than less. I don't think they meant that. I'm sure they didn't. It's terrible. And to think that the Democrats who oppose this only because they want to go the opposite way, they'd like to pack the court. They want to put on 21 people. They want to pack the court, pack the Supreme Court. Maybe they should do it. Maybe they would be better off if they did it. They want to pack the court. They want to do anything to hurt our country. There will no longer be any doubt, and the income coming in and the protection of our companies and country will actually increase because of this decision. I don't think the court meant that, but it's the way it is. Based on long-standing law and hundreds of victories, and even, as I was pointed out before, even thousands of victories over the years, to the contrary, the Supreme Court did not overrule tariffs. They merely overruled a particular use of IEEPA tariffs. And essentially, it's used to get a fee. I can do anything I want with IEEPA, anything. I just can't charge anybody for it. I can license, I just can't charge them. It's ridiculous, but it's okay because we have other ways, numerous other ways. The ability to block, embargo, restrict, license, or impose any other condition on a foreign country's ability to conduct trade with the United States under IEEPA has been fully confirmed by this decision. So now there's no doubt, because, you know, there were a lot of questions about tariffs because no president was smart enough to use them to protect our country from those countries and businesses that were ripping us off. You took a look at the deficits that we had with some of these countries. It was disgraceful what they got away with for many, many decades. But now we know, because this decision affirms all those things that some people weren't sure about. In order to protect, and it says so, in order to protect our country, a president can actually charge more tariffs than I was charging in the past period of a year under the various tariff authorities. So we can use other of the statutes, other of the tariff authorities, which have also been confirmed and are fully allowed. Therefore, effective immediately, all national security tariffs under Section 232 and existing Section 301 tariffs, they're existing, they're there, remain in place, fully in place, and in full force and effect. Today, I will sign an order to impose a 10% global tariff under Section 122 over and above our normal tariffs already being charged. And we're also initiating several Section 301 and other investigations to protect our country from unfair trading practices of other countries and companies. Thank you for your attention to this matter, and I say quite simply, which I've said for a long time, make America great again. And interestingly, we've already made it great, so I don't have to use that, but I don't think we'll ever give up on MAGA. MAGA is always going to be with us. If you have a few questions, you can let us know. But just to end, so we're going forward, we will be able to take in more money, and there'll no longer be doubt, because there was always doubt. I know the people that brought the lawsuit, and they're sleazebags, major sleazebags, but I know them, and they're foreign country centric. They were sending things into our country, and the people representing them knew full well, but they were sending things into our country, and they were beneficial to other countries, but very, very bad for us. And I stopped it, and we'll just keep it going. So we have a totally firm decision now, and I don't think the court meant it, because the court doesn't show great spirit toward our country, in my opinion. A lot of bad decisions, but there are usually ways around it. This is something we could have done, as Justice Kavanaugh said, we could have done this originally, but we're doing it now, and the numbers could be far greater than the hundreds of billions we've already taken in. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, I'm very curious. You've spoken about
in the red.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Justice Thomas and Alito, as you know, are the most conservative constitutional justices. Do you think that you'll get to appoint 2 more justices later this term with similar ideologies? And what type of vetting process will they go through to ensure they uphold
I don't know, but they're
the
great
Constitution?
justices. That's all I can say. And I hope they're going to be around a long time. I hope they're going to stay healthy. They're great people. They're great. And Justice Alito, too, to add to the group. These are great men.
Right.
With a great love of our country and a great understanding of the law.
Mr. President, are you going to ask Congress to take additional action on tariffs now?
No, I don't need to. It's already been approved. I mean, I would ask Congress and probably get it. When people look at the real numbers, and you look at hundreds of billions of dollars that have come into our country. Yesterday, I was at a steel plant, as you know, and I went to great place, great plant, great, wonderful people. And they were telling me, I said to them, you were there, a lot of the press in this room. Of course, I don't think this plane's big enough to take the press in this room, but a lot of the press right here. We were in Georgia. And I said to the owner, I made a speech at a factory. They make steel products. And I said, how are you? Nice to meet you. How's business? President, I'd love to kiss you. This is a very powerful man. I don't want to be kissed by that man, but a very powerful, strong man. He's been in the steel business for many years. His father started it. And he said, sir, I want to kiss you. I said, why? He said, because we were down to working 1 hour a week, and then you came in and imposed tariffs, and all of that foreign junk that they were dropping into our country stopped. And we're now going to double shifts, 7 days a week, and we may be very soon going to 24 hours around the clock, almost 7 days a week. He said, sir, I want to kiss you so badly. And I said, no, thank you. But you know what? He just to finalize it, he said, oh, this is a great place in Georgia. In Georgia, he said, all up and down the highway, same exact answer, sir. We're all going out of business. We're going to go bankrupt. We're all going out of business. And now every one of us are thriving, and we're hiring people like we haven't. He said, like I've never, and he's been in business for, I think, 45 years, like we've never hired before. That's because of tariffs. And we're going to keep it going the same way. And you're going to start to see the results in a year from now when all those factories start that are under construction right now. You see all the construction numbers are so good. Those construction workers are building factories that are going to be open, including not only AI, which is big, but car plants coming in from Canada, who ripped us off for 30% of our market. Mexico ripped us off for a big portion. Over the years, they've taken our market. They've taken our cars. They manufacture them in Japan, Germany, and all over the place. Taken our cars. They manufacture them in Japan, Germany, and all over the place. Taken our cars. They manufacture them in Japan, Germany, and all over the place. Taken our cars. They manufacture them in Japan, Germany, and but if you're going to make a car in some other country, you're going to pay a 15, 20, 30% tariff. And those things would have never happened. We wouldn't have lost our business. Same thing with, as an example, Taiwan. Taiwan came in. They stole our chip business. They made chips. For 30 years longer, they made chip. And they put our companies. Intel would be now the largest company. I saved Intel. I literally saved. They put our companies. Intel would be now the largest company. I saved Intel. I literally saved it at the beginning of this administration. And now all those companies in Taiwan are building factories in Arizona, Texas, and various other places because they don't want to pay tariffs. They're all pouring into the United States. But just like that great patriot said yesterday, sir, what you've done, nobody thought was possible. And Steve Moore, a highly respected economist, came into my office yesterday. He said, you've done something nobody's ever done. 22 Nobel Prize winners in economics said we would right now be in a recession. And you said, no, we're going to have a booming country. We're going to have a booming country. You were right. All 22 were wrong, and you were right. This country is booming, and it's booming because of the election on November 5th. And it's booming for another reason. It's booming because of tariffs. Yeah, please, go ahead.
You said ahead of this decision that if the Supreme Court
please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. What will you say to foreign nations who seek to renegotiate their deals? And what did you mean a moment ago when you said that the Supreme Court has been swayed by foreign interests?
Well, I think that foreign interests are represented by people that I believe have undue influence. They have a lot of influence over the Supreme Court, whether it's through fear or respect or friendships, I don't know. But I know some of the people that were involved on the other side, and I don't like them. I think they're real slime balls. And got to do what's right for the country. You got to do what's right for the Constitution. That's why I respect so much Justice Thomas and Alito, Kavanaugh, because they not only dissented, their dissent is so strong. When you read their dissent, you know, a lot of times you'll read a dissent and it's like, well, you don't know, it could go either way. There's no other way. The good news is, it's like Justice Kavanaugh said, very strongly said, you have other ways you can go. You don't have to go that way. You can go other way. There are numerous other ways you can go. And frankly, this should have been done by presidents many years ago. They allowed our country to be eaten alive. We lost 50% of our car business. We used to make cars. We made all the cars. And then Mexico came, Canada came, and Japan and Germany. But they're all coming back now. They're all coming back at record levels.
So what happens next? Who better to answer that question than the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, who joins me now here in Dallas. Mr. Secretary, it's great to have you in Texas.
Well, good to be with you. Great to be here in the Lone Star State.
We're glad to have you. So I listened to you speak this morning, and we have heard from the president. It sounds like the position of the administration is really nothing has changed today.
Well, to be clear, today was a loss for the American people. because by taking away President Trump's instantaneous leverage using the IEPA authority, the American people have suffered a significant setback. Think to this time last year when President Trump put on the fentanyl tariffs against Mexico, Canada, China for the precursor chemicals, and then we saw a rapid decline in fentanyl deaths. If that's not an emergency authority, what was? On October 8th, when the Chinese government said that they were going to put a worldwide export control on any product that had 0.01% Chinese rare earths in it, 24 hours later, President Trump said that he would impose a 100% tariff on China if they did it. They immediately came to the negotiating table, and we were able to negotiate a one-year extension. So in terms of the direction of travel, national security, how we will get there with these deals, nothing, revenue, nothing has changed. But what has changed, the Supreme Court has taken away the president's leverage, but in a way, they have made the leverage that he has more draconian because they agreed he does have the right to a full embargo.
So that's what I mean when I say that in a way the line from the administration seems to be that nothing has changed today. It's not that the tariffs haven't been used to control fentanyl or to control trade with China, but rather when I've listened to you speak so far today and the president, that you will immediately institute these tariffs, continue these tariffs through different mechanisms. You can, through I believe it's Section 122, immediately extend these tariffs for 5 months. And in the meantime, then launch investigations to extend these tariffs further under other sections of these trade acts.
Exactly, and the durability of the Section 232s, Section 301s, which are already in effect, and the Commerce and USTR will launch additional investigations into additional deficiencies. Those will take 30, 60, 90 days, but within 3 days, the president can put on the Section 122 10% global tariff. So at Treasury, for the full year 2026, we foresee no decrease in revenue. But again, it's the instantaneous power that the president has. But now that he's going to have to, if he wants to negotiate with these countries, he does have the right to say, I can embargo all your products. We just can't collect $1 from the embargo.
But why wasn't, if this same authority exists under these different sections of the 1974, 1962 Trade Acts, why not just do that in the first place instead of IEPA? If this was capable in the first place and that everything basically remains the same today, even though the Supreme Court has struck down this authority under IEPA, why not just go this path from day one on Liberation Day?
Oh, because the IEPA tariffs were custom made for President Trump to assert leverage versus the countries. I think the other thing that we will look back and think that the use of IEPA tariffs actually set the format for the countries because we were able to bring them to the table very quickly. It's just much more cleaner to be able to say, come and negotiate. We have a 45% tariff on you. Come and negotiate. And bring down your tariffs on us, your non-tariff trade barriers, your subsidies for all that. So as opposed to, look, we're going to do a 301, we're going to do a 232, we're going to combine all these things because that's what, in essence, going to happen now. We will get back to the same tariff level for the countries. It will just be in a less direct and slightly more convoluted manner. So actually being able to do the IEPA out of the blocks was helpful.
A couple more questions on the tariffs so that I understand what happens next. You mentioned the revenue will not change for Treasury, but what about the revenue you've already collected? What about the $175 billion? Do you anticipate having to make refunds at Treasury?
Well, I'm not going to get out ahead of the courts. And as the president said, the Supreme Court was very discombobulated on this. They didn't give any guidance on it. I think it's probably not 175. I think it's probably closer to 130, but still a substantial amount. They have remanded it back down to a lower court. And as Amy Coney Barrett said in the original hearing that I was at, this could be a mess. And this could take months, this could take years to litigate and to get to the payouts. And if there is a payout, it looks like it's just going to be the ultimate corporate welfare. Because what you don't know is, did a Chinese supplier lower their price? So they lowered their price because of the tariff. The product came into the U.S. The buyer paid the tariff, but it was really the same price as before, but they're going to get a refund on the tariff.
So it's a direct payoff to the importer, direct payoff to the country that you were looking to try to control behavior.
Yep.
One more, speaking of international trade and speaking of other countries, one more on tariffs. These trade deals that you and Jameson Greer and President Trump have negotiated, say with the UK, say with the European Union, that were done in part with leverage from the tariffs. And for that matter, the peace deals as well to solve these wars. Are those deals under any kind of threat now? Do you think everyone will honor the deals, even though now supposedly the tariffs have been done asunder by the Supreme Court?
Well, again, we can move to 232 and 301 tariffs, so I think that everyone is going to honor their deal. And there is the draconian alternative that the Supreme Court reaffirmed that the president has. He has the right to a complete embargo.
Right.
Like he can just cut countries off. He can cut whole product lines off. We can't receive any money. So, I would call on all countries to honor their agreements and move forward.
All right. One of the reasons you're here today, Mr. Secretary, in Dallas is you are talking about Trump accounts. You have said when it comes to Trump accounts that they are the most significant policy innovation in modern times. You've called it the greatest merger in world history. Those are big, big compliments to Trump accounts. What is so transformative?
Well, again, we are merging. When I said it is a big merger, it is Wall Street and Main Street. 38% of American families have no exposure to the U.S. stock market. Our great innovation machine, capitalist machine, the economic growth machine, and with Trump accounts for the next 4 years, every child born, parents fill out a form, child gets an account, Treasury puts in $1,000. It goes into an index fund. It's available to the child when he or she turns 18. During that period, parents, employers, relatives can contribute up to $1,000. And we've also got some of our great philanthropists, Texan, Susan, and Michael Dell, are contributing $6.25 billion to the children of America via the Trump accounts.
So they arrive at the age of 18, they've already got a nest egg built up, compound interest over 18 years.
Over 18 years. So at 18, you can use it for a down payment on a house, you can use it for a car down payment for education, or you can roll it into a more traditional retirement account and let it roll until you're 60. And that's a very nice kind of barbell with Social Security and then to get the lump sum. But I think this is going to be transformational, and it's also going to give everyone a stake in the markets, in the economy.
I'm glad you bring up the analogy of the barbell. So there are a lot of people who are rightfully concerned about the state of the American economy, specifically wealth distribution and the plight of the working class. And quite honestly, Mr. Secretary, I don't give gratuitous compliments, but I'm not afraid to give them when they are accurate. You have been a voice for that. I've heard you talk about this in long-form conversations. You're concerned about the price of eggs, the price of gas, the price of life, a home for the working class, for the middle class, for America. And there's a lot of concern out there. I know there's good indicators. I know the Dow broke 50,000. I know the S&P's above 7,000. Not great GDP numbers that just came in this morning on the fourth quarter. But still, despite the good signs, there is pain out there among the working class. How is the Trump administration not just helping the top of the market, but helping it get down to the people that really need the help?
Well, I think a lot of the pain is muscle memory from being abused so badly during the 4 years of the Biden administration. 21.5% inflation for working families, probably in the 30s because their bundle of goods and services, the rent, insurance, groceries, car payments, probably much higher. So what we are seeing, we've seen real wage increases for every month President Trump has been in office. So inflation is coming down, still too high, but moving back towards the Fed's target. But wages have grown faster than inflation, and real wages went down about 3 or 4% just on the 21.5 number, forget the 30 number, the inflation number during the Biden era. During President Trump's first term, hourly workers did better than supervisory workers. The bottom 50% of American households had a bigger net worth increase than the top 10%, and I think we are going back onto that.
So you have given, as I said, and as I've complimented you, which I think is deserved, some of the best articulation and voice of the Trump administration's economic policy. You've often described it as 3-3-3. 3% GDP growth, 3% deficit, 3 million new barrels of oil a day. I've seen criticism of this. The criticism is not in aspiration, but whether or not it can actually be accomplished. And I think the number that most people wonder is, can the federal deficit actually ever get down to 3%? I don't know where we are today, somewhere between 5 and 6%. And the CBO, which I know you do not trust, but CBO projects it to go up. And look, fiscal restraint's never been the muscle memory of Congress. So how are we going to do it? How do we get the deficit to 3%?
Well, again, let's look at a little history. 2024, deficit to GDP was 6.9%, final year of the Biden administration, highest it had ever been when we weren't in a recession, weren't at war. The 2025 down to 5.4%. How do we do that? By restraining spending and growing the denominator. So we can grow our way out of this if we don't have to.
On the note of growth, does it concern you then that the fourth quarter GDP just came in the ones? Was it 1.4%? And I know that's noisy. I know it's short term, but is that concerning for you on your GDP aspiration?
What's concerning for me is the Democrats' willingness to crash the economy to make a ridiculous point. So it was this longest shutdown in history that caused the fourth quarter to crash. We had second quarter 4.1. Third quarter 4.4, and then this drop off, it would have been 100, 200 basis points higher. The other thing that's going, the unsung here, is the big write downs that the car companies took because of the ridiculous Biden EV mandates. So you get those big write downs in the auto companies, and that's a hit to GDP. So
back to the deficit, Mr. Secretary, can this actually be done? So I will grant you that I think you probably have a very good economic policy in place that's going to lead to GDP growth over some arc. The question is, can Congress ever stop spending? Can you ever get Congress, and can you do it, by the way, without touching defense, Medicare, and Social Security?
We can, if we restrain the numerator and grow the denominator. So, I believe we can grow 3.5% this year at least.
2026.
2026. Add on 2.2% inflation, then you're at 5.7 nominal growth, and the expenses go up 2%, 3% with inflation, and you will grow your way out of this. You will start bending the curve down, and we could be at 3, something with a 3 in front of it by the time the president leaves office. And to be candid, this is why I came out from behind my desk. I had a nice life in Charleston, South Carolina. I could be sitting there now, but I went to see President Trump. And the first time I went in to see him at Mar-a-Lago to talk about joining the economic team, joining the campaign, unprompted, he looked across the desk and said to me, "Scott, how are we going to get this terrible deficit, this terrible debt down without causing a recession?"
Yes, that's the trick, right? And can it be done without a recession?
I think it can. And everything we're doing, tax policy, trade policy, and the permitting reform and loosening regulation, the deregulatory policy is what's really going to let us grow. Because that's why, I don't know if Texas were a country what the GDP would be, but you've got huge inbound here, good tax policy, and incredible deregulation here.
It's a great little laboratory experiment in that type of economy, that type of regulation, that type of governance. Interesting. This is what brought you out from behind that desk, in part 333, but in part to figure out how we can get out of this deficit hole that we're in, ultimately this debt hole that we're in. I would love to, let's talk a little bit more about behind that desk. I have been fascinated with you, your life, your career. One of the things that I think some people know about your career, if they don't, they're about to learn, is that you worked for a long time, 2 different stints, 15 years for George Soros. And there's a lot of people watching, I'm sure you know, Mr. Secretary, like, what? The Secretary worked for George Soros? There's a lot of people, perhaps me included, that have a lot of doubts about this man. So I would ask you, what do we misunderstand about George Soros?
Well, a couple of things. My job for him was working at the investment side, never on the foundation side, and those were kept very separate. And for my first stint, Mr. Soros was focused on bringing down the Iron Curtain and was very helpful in the collapse of the Soviet Union. After I had left the first time, sometime in the early 2000s, I don't know what happened. He got much more focused on domestic policy. He and I rarely talked about politics. We haven't spoken since just after President Trump was elected in 2016.
Haven't spoken in 10 years.
And I would tell you that we had a very robust discussion, and election night 2016 was one of the 3 best periods I've ever had for money making, because I thought President Trump was going to win. And I don't know if you remember, Will, but election night 2016, the market crashed. Market crashed, and that was one of the greatest buying opportunities of all time, because I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, this is the most pro-business president probably since Calvin Coolidge. And I later found out that George Soros was the one selling the market. He was crashing the market, lost several $1 billion that night, and myself and several others made a lot of money for our investors the next few weeks.
We have a couple minutes left together, but I just can't pass up following up on what it means to have a robust conversation, not with George Soros, but with Scott Bessent, because I understand there's been some robust conversations. Elon Musk, Bill Pulte. Is there a point here, if I push this interview hard enough, or am I walking on thin ice?
Look, I'm from a small town in South Carolina, and we like to keep it inside, but you can always take it outside. I don't know. I'm always told don't mess with Texas, Will. But I would say don't mess with the low country of South Carolina either.
Fair enough. Okay, fair enough. One more, not to press the issue, but one more on George Soros. You said you didn't talk politics, you didn't talk policy, you did talk investment. Here's the great question for me, and Mr. Soros has an open invitation to come spend an hour with me here on Will Cain Show, or his son for that matter, because I just want to understand the vision. What is the vision of George Soros for this world?
Again, many people have asked me that. I don't understand. Country's been very good to him. It was just like this young Olympic athlete that the vice president was talking about earlier on the previous show. America was great to her. She sold out to China. That America was great to Mr. Soros. He has a very different vision, and it's mercifully, it is one that the American people don't share. So,
right.
But
well, let's stay, if you wouldn't mind, just one more. And I don't know that I've seen you address this, but we've crossed the line from your public office to your private life. And, Gavin Newsom and you went back and forth at Davos. He made a post that I think many saw as homophobic. It kind of played on Real Husbands or Housewives of Davos. He threw around knee pads, in some type of sexual innuendo. You are the highest-ranking gay public policy office holder, I believe, in the history of America. And I'll bet you there are some people watching that don't know that what I just said, because you're not a member of the Biden administration. That hasn't been the top line of your resume. You're not the first and proclaimed and celebrated because of that fact. That's been a fact in the background, unimportant to the Trump administration. I'm just curious what that says about you and the Trump administration.
Well, it's what it says about President Trump. President Trump created the cabinet, not because who you go home to at night, not because of the color of your skin, not because of your religion, not because of some background. Created it based on merit. So, like, I go to the office every day knowing that I was chosen on merit. And the Gavin Newsom, one thing I would tell you, if you want to go back to boxing, that guy cannot take a punch. I mean,
what do you mean?
He likes to dish it out, but you push back on him and he gets completely flustered. Oh. I mean, it is, you bark at him and he...
Glass jaw.
Glass jaw, and I think like slow brain.
Okay. Well, Secretary Bessent, this has been a pleasure. I really appreciate the 25 minutes you gave us here today. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. I'm glad to hear the economic vision and glad to get to know you a little bit as a man. Thank you for your time here today.
Good to see you, Will.
All right.
Hello, everybody. I'm Martha McCallum, along with Paul Morrow, Jessica Tarlov, Jesse Waters, and Greg Gutfeld. It is The Five, it is New York City, and it is live. Hi, everybody. All right, so as you saw today, President Trump is not deterred. He's not happy, but he's not deterred. After the Supreme Court struck down his sweeping tariffs under the Emergency Powers Law, it was a 6-3 decision, and it did upend in some ways something that has been a major tool of his economic agenda, and a word that he says is his favorite word of all, tariffs. So no doubt, a bit of a setback, but I'm not sure how much. He says he's not giving up. He's vowing that alternatives will be put in place, and he wasted no time on this. He put in a 10% global tariff under a different Trade Act, the Trade Act of 1974, and those tariffs will expire in 5 months. That's a pretty long time, unless Congress extends them after that. And the president had much more to say on this in the briefing room. Watch.
The Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs is deeply disappointing, and I'm ashamed of certain members of the court, absolutely ashamed, for not having the courage to do what's right for our country. Foreign countries that have been ripping us off for years are ecstatic. They're so happy. And they're dancing in the streets, but they won't be dancing for long. This happens so often with this court. What a shame. Having to do with voting in particular, when in fact they're just being fools and lapdogs for the rhinos and the radical left Democrats. They're very unpatriotic and disloyal to our Constitution. I understand how they are very easily swayed. I want to be a good boy. I said to the owner, I made a speech at a factory. I said, how are you? Nice to meet you. How's business? President, I'd love to kiss you. This is a very powerful man. I don't want to be kissed by that man.
But why wouldn't you just work with Congress to come up with a plan?
I don't have to.
No, the Supreme Court justices who ruled against this the policy, striking it down, are they still invited to your State of the Union next week? And will you speak with them?
They are invited, barely. I think it's an embarrassment to their families. You want to know the truth.
All right, there you have it. Lively news conference today from the president. Some potential 2028 Democrats, of course, wasted no time to try to take advantage of this moment. California Governor Gavin Newsom gloated on X within minutes. He said this: "Time to pay the piper, Donald. Your tariffs were nothing more than an illegal cash grab that drove up prices, hurt working families, and wrecked longstanding global alliances." And other Democrats also eager to weigh in. Watch.
I'm glad the Supreme Court was able to look at it from an independent lens and just look at the legality of it.
I think the president needs to actually listen to the Supreme Court and drop this and stop the pain for Pennsylvanians, stop the pains for the American people.
This is good news for the American economy and for so many families around the country. This is also a very important reminder that this president is not unstoppable.
You know, Paul Morrow, I want to start with you on the legal side of this. You know, it strikes me listening to the reaction from Democrats there that, you know, the economy is showing a lot of signs of improvement. Wages are up, gas prices are down. You know, there's a lot of, most economists are evaluating this as an about to turn around significantly economy. I also see this, I was a little bit surprised in some ways that the president was so upset about this. And I talked to a few people who thought, you know, he's still winning on this. And he could have just come out and said, you know what, whatever about your ruling, but we're going to figure out a way. We have a number of other options on this, which they've been working on for some time. And we can put those into place. It's not a big loss. And I don't think that money's ever going to get paid back, $175 billion brought in tariffs. I don't know how they would do that. What do you think?
I'm surprised that he actually has made as big a deal out of this as he has, because there are very clear workarounds. The best one I see is 232. We've talked about it, 1962 Trade Act. And what he can do is he can use those powers to go after specific countries for national security reasons. Those are the ones that matter, as in China. Message to Newsom, by the way, who in my estimation is very much in China's pocket due to Silicon Valley. He can go at those individual nations. The mistake I feel that was made here is that he put an across-the-board tariff and then tried to say it was an emergency. It is an emergency relative to specific countries, but when you do it to everybody, the argument that it's an emergency gets undermined, which is one of the things that the plaintiffs said here in this case. Relative to the restitution, I just hope that the trade deals that they cut after the tariffs were done by a good contract attorney. Here's why. Because what happens with that is it's an international contract, right? They cut deals due to the tariffs, and they cut trade deals with us. Consequently, I would have had in there a non-restitution clause. That is to say, okay, if you come at me later and try to say, hey, this was done on false pretenses, I want the money back, here's clause B, pal, you get nothing. I hope that they did it that way, because if that's the case and that's there, this is a big nothing burger. And strategically, let's move from legal. Legal, I think he's going to get it. By the way, he goes, the only requirement here to go into 232, the Commerce Department has to do an investigation. You know who's the head of the Commerce Department? Lutnick. All right, he gets that overnight. So the thing here is that strategically, when the voting rights decision comes down, and that is, in my estimation, going to go his way, which is much more impactful, when the left starts to say, SCOTUS is in his pocket, he has to say, hey, look at the last one that I lost. Strategically, this is not that big a deal, and in fact, may help him in the future.
Yeah, and of course, the Roe v. Wade decision went the way that he and conservatives wanted it to go, a huge decision. So Jessica, when you look at, his attitude towards the court on this one, what's your reaction?
I'm not surprised that he didn't take the win, actually, that they handed him on this. There was a great opportunity to say, this wasn't my fault, my plan was working, the court is bad, but not so bad. We've gotten these really good things from them because you got a lot of great decisions as far as he's concerned, and then move away from an economic policy that's been hurting everyday Americans and American businesses. But instead, to double down and go with, as Paul pointed out, this 10% blanket tariff, which shows that you're not actually thinking about what you're doing. You're just mad and you love tariffs, and so you're slapping it on everyone.
Wait, I didn't say that.
No, that was me. That part was me. I just said the blanket part. But you did say that that's why he was able to be undermined, because he did the blanket.
It's a reasonable argument. It is. It's
right.
a reasonable
that
argument.
the Supreme Court made and Paul Morrow made, and now Jessica Tarlov, so it's got to be good. We know that the average American household paid an extra $1,000 last year because of these tariffs. We know that the average American
$2,000 extra under the Biden economy.
The only way that inflation that you got because of a global health pandemic versus tariffs that he chose to put on us are very, very different. You know that 90% of the cost was transferred right over to the average American. You know also that we only had GDP growth for Q4 of 1.4%. I don't know if you were watching TV this morning. There was shock on people's faces. It was below even the lowest expectation. I think that Gorsuch's concurrence was maybe the most important part of the majority opinion today, where he basically said, we have a constitution. I know that you don't like it and that you think that you should bypass Congress, but there is a way that we do things here. And saying that it's only Democrats who are upset about tariffs really misses the point. Rand Paul out front on this. There were, I think, 6 Republican House members that voted with Democrats to remove the tariffs on Canada. 3 outstanding questions. $175 billion is owed back to Americans. How are we getting it? J.B. Pritzker is already suing the administration, $1,700 per Illinois resident. How will our trading partners respond? And then where will Trump go with this? We heard the 10% already, but there is an opportunity to back off because Republicans don't want to campaign for the midterms with a bunch of unnecessary tariffs.
Well, there's a historic argument that after World War II, the trade relationships that were put in place to help those countries recover after World War II were essentially still in effect in a latter-day form, and that if you don't go in bold on some of these things and shake up the chessboard, nothing will ever happen. If you wait for Congress to try to rectify these injustices that have been existing in trade relationships for so long. So I think this is classic Trump. I think this is classic Trump MO, Jesse, that he's like, go big, swing for the fences. Yeah. I'll deal with the courts later. At least then I've moved the ball down the road.
This is what Jessica doesn't understand about the strategy, is because he directs U.S. foreign policy, and foreign trade falls under foreign policy. That's why he went big, sweeping, across-the-board tariffs, because it knocks every other country out of their seat. They rush to Washington, D.C., and sign these deals as fast as possible. The deals are still in place. Foreign investment is still pouring in, and that's when you look at the construction activity. All of the factories are being built because as these tariffs are set, it's cheaper to build the product here so it doesn't get hit with the duty that it comes in.
100,000 manufacturing jobs.
No, we're talking about construction. That always precedes manufacturing. I'll talk to you about that later. So the Supreme Court comes in and says, listen, you can't use this authority. You have to use this authority. So you have to do an investigation first. That's like telling a landscaper, you can't use a leaf blower, you got to use a rake. going to take a little longer, but it's going to accomplish the same thing. We need speed. This is the 21st century. You have to give the president a free hand to negotiate these deals and retaliate when the other side retaliates. Carney in Canada doesn't have to go to Parliament. He doesn't have to conduct an investigation. He hits back hard. Ursula in the EU, same thing. Xi Jinping, he dumps and he tariffs. He's got a sword and a shield.
He's a dictator.
He's not a sitting duck. Oh, so's Carney then. He's not a sitting duck like us who has to wait and then go and do an investigation and then come back. This is what we need now. Not only this, he's now gotten the Panama Canal back from tariffs. He's brought Greenland back into our orbit, and he's gotten NATO funding boosted from tariffs, not to mention the fact that wars have been settled because of tariffs. This is what's going to happen. He's just going to reinstitute the same posture under a different code, and they're going to go back to where they were. But the silver lining is, you're right. This time, when you do an investigation, you might be able to target strategic industries and do carve-outs like coffee or clothing, non-national security related issues, and then you can still have a tariff regime that keeps in charge of economic national security, and we still have the justices invited to the State of the Union.
Well, that is most important.
Barely.
I mean, Greg, the justice's job is to evaluate the law that was used and decide whether or not it makes legal sense to them within the realm of the Constitution. You know, they need to figure out the separation of powers. That's what they did. I don't think it undermined this entire program at all. What do you think?
Try to think of something that hasn't been said yet in the last 3 hours. I got to say, it's tough. I don't think I'm with Paul in the sense that it doesn't block the system of tariffs. It just adjusts the leverage. It was entirely about leverage. And for the people that are gloating, they were probably the same people who backed the student loan bailout. You know, they could STFU. The Supreme Court pooped on that, but that didn't stop Biden, did it? Or how about the vaccine mandates? Supreme Court crapped on that too, but they still did it to government employees. There's always a workaround, but shut up is what I'm saying. Here's what the media won't tell you. Again, it's about how much they lie about things. They lie about everything, including the Supreme Court, which they defined as MAGA. Remember, the Supreme Court was in Trump's pocket. And this was another scary narrative that was used in order for them to push things like term limits and packing the courts. But what it also did was it inflamed the public with this demonizing rhetoric that led to, you know, unwell leftists, surprise, surprise, trying to kill a Supreme Court justice. It's interesting how all of this rhetoric leads in one place, people trying to kill Republicans. The thing about being a Republican, though, we don't need a utopia. You know, we're used to work. So if we don't get it through this time, we do it something else. Our goals are secondary to our system, and we have a system. Trump has a very unique system, and it has a lot to do with leverage and working on behalf of the American people. Again, he's our a-hole. He's not the world's a-hole. He does it for us. And tariffs are not an emotional thing to us. It's just a tool. But it's because it's an emotional thing for Democrats, they have to take it as, oh, yeah, this is so great. It's like, you know what? This is just another day. We're going to get it, whether you like it or not.
You know who's a real loser here? Iran, because POTUS is in a bad mood.
Yeah. By the way, I do get what Gorsuch is saying. You know, you don't want to open up the opportunity for other presidents to enact policies based on emergencies of their design. But that would never stop a Democrat, because they do that anyway. If you don't trans your dog, that's the apocalypse. So you know, they
forgot about all our trans puppies.
Yes, they never consider the ramifications of what they're doing now. But as conservatives and Republicans, it's in our blood to think about consequences.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.